Imagine a single lap, a single corner, and a single moment that forces an entire sport to look in the mirror. One race does not change culture overnight, but sometimes one incident does change the rulebook. Welcome back to Horizon Resonance. Today we're telling the story of a race that did more than decide a winner. It exposed a blind spot, created outrage, and pushed governing bodies to rewrite the rules. This is about systems, responsibility, and how tragedy can become the engine for safer racing. The race was billed as a classic, narrow circuit, packed stands, and the kind of pressure where drivers risk everything for glory. The grid featured veterans and hungry rookies. Engineers had shaved tenths of seconds wherever they could. Lighter body panels, higher revs, and aggressive setups that flirted with the limits of grip. Fans wanted drama. Teams wanted headlines. Sponsors wanted victories. On lap 27, with rain starting to speckle the asphalt, a chain of small factors aligned. A marshal's flag was waved to warn of debris ahead, but the field was compressed. Visibility was low. One driver, pushing hard to regain a position after a poor start, clipped a damp curb at the limit of adhesion. The car unsettled, spun, and slid into a pack of competitors. In a matter of seconds, a pileup unfolded like dominoes. Cars were stranded, barriers shredded, and a serious, career-threatening crash became the image that dominated headlines for weeks. The immediate questions were practical. Why did that corner become unforgiving? Why did so many cars arrive at the same line at once? The inquiry broadened when the public saw the replay in slow motion. Cars that appeared safe on paper were suddenly vulnerable in reality. Engineers looked at telemetry and found an unexpected truth. The combination of an overly aggressive setup and a specific weather window had dramatically reduced the margin for correction. Meanwhile, race control's response times and communication chains came under scrutiny. Did the marshals signal early enough? Did the teams have timely information? Investigations exposed three uncomfortable realities. First, the technical margins had thinned. Teams were pushing components, tires, and aero into regions where a small disturbance produced catastrophic results. Second, the governance model relied on shared assumptions that teams, marshals, and officials would always read the same cues and act in synchrony. When any single part of that chain lagged, the whole system became fragile. Third, the human factor, split-second decisions by drivers and marshals, had been underestimated when rule-making favored performance metrics over safety protocols. What followed was a public outcry. Fans demanded answers. Broadcasters replayed the crash ad nauseum. The images did not sit quietly. Sponsors grew nervous. The sport's governing body convened emergency meetings. Importantly, the reaction wasn't simply punishment. It was a deep audit of systems. Committees reviewed everything: car design limits, wet weather procedures, marshal positioning, and the clarity of radio protocols. They even examined how live data from cars was used to inform real-time decisions during the race. Two types of rule changes emerged. Some were technical and immediate: tighter regulations on suspension travel and ride height, mandatory limits on how aggressively teams could tune certain components, and improved minimum standards for tire performance in mixed conditions. Others were operational and cultural: stricter marshal training, redundant radio checks, a clearer chain of command for when to deploy safety cars, and improved protocols for communicating track hazards to drivers. One of the most visible changes was how the sport handled wet and variable weather sessions. Rather than allow each team to guess the right compromise between pace and grip, officials introduced staged protocols, predetermined thresholds where the race slowed, mandatory check-in laps, and stricter rules for pit lane entries during compromised conditions. The idea was to create predictable windows of reduced risk so that split-second surprises were less likely to cascade into multi-car incidents. Equally significant were new reporting and maintenance standards. Some failures traced back to parts operating beyond recommended service life. Regulators began requiring more rigorous life cycle tracking for critical components and tighter pre-race checklists that could not be overridden for the sake of saving time. If before, a team could make judgment calls on whether to replace a part after this race, there were far fewer gray areas. Certain parts had mandatory replacement intervals and independent spot checks. The driver's role in all this remained complex. Some criticized reckless behavior, while others pointed to how team pressure and sponsor expectations pushed drivers toward marginal decisions. Many teams responded by changing their internal protocols. Clearer radio messages that allow the engineer to call a conservative line, mandatory safe mode settings under certain track flags, and policies to protect drivers who refuse to take excessive risks. What's important to understand is that these changes didn't kill the spectacle. Racing remained fast, competitive, and theatrical, but the margins of error widened in some crucial ways. Where once a single small failure could trigger a catastrophe, the system now had more redundancy. The trade-off was sometimes lap time. Regulations cost tenths, but those tenths bought lives, careers, and public trust. There's also a deeper cultural shift worth noting. The race forced a conversation about responsibility. It made teams, drivers, officials, and fans consider what they tolerate in the name of excitement. That debate matters because it shapes the sport's future. When safety becomes part of the scoreboard, measured, audited, and enforced, the incentives align differently. Teams still push the envelope, but now with clearer boundaries and shared consequences. From a storytelling perspective, what makes this episode resonate is that it's not a single villain story. It's systemic. A crash is rarely just one error. It's the accumulation of small design choices, human decisions, and organizational habits. The rule changes that followed were not only technical fixes, but institutional learning. They showed how a closed system can adapt, and how the sport's stewards can convert a crisis into a roadmap for improvement. So what's the takeaway for fans and aspiring engineers? First, be curious about the systems that support performance, not just the flashy outputs. Second, recognize that accountability is multi-layered. It's not only about blaming a driver, but about checking the supply chain that makes high performance possible. Finally, progress often comes from hard lessons. The race that changed the rules was painful, but it made the sport safer and more thoughtful. Now I want to hear from you. What rule change surprised you the most? Do you think the sport struck the right balance between safety and spectacle? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll read the best replies in the next episode. If you like this dive, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Daily stories, sharp insights, and the roads that shape them. This is Horizon Resonance. See you in the next lap.